Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. It's the isolation that destroys us. The solution is in community. Today on the podcast, we have Barry Bekkedam. This is Barry's first interview since returning from federal prison last year. What I liked most about Barry was his openness and candor as he painstakingly takes us through his remarkable story from immigrant to starter on the Villanova basketball team to real estate investor to multi-billion-dollar mainline investment manager, and then to his problems when some of his clients lost money in the Rothstein Ponzi scheme, and then as former chairman of a bank accused of TARP fraud. Barry took his case to trial and was partially vindicated, but ultimately was sentenced to 11 months in federal prison. Barry's is an incredible story of resilience through over a decade of issues. So coming up, Barry Bekkedam on White Collar Week. I hope you'll join us. Hello, and welcome to White Collar Week, a podcast sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries, the world's first ministry serving the white-collar justice community. I'm Jeff Grant, co-founder and your host. I served almost 14 months in a federal prison for a white-collar crime I committed when I was a lawyer, so I know that it's the isolation that kills us, and the solution is in community. So let's get started. Hi, folks, and welcome to White Collar Week. Today, we have such an interesting guest. I can't even tell you. His name is Barry Bekkedam. And I don't know if I should introduce you as a bank owner, as a private capital guy, as a basketball player, as an exceptionally tall person. You have you have so many cool aspects. But in our prep call, I just found you, or our first call, so engaging, and a story like yours it's not common, and especially for someone who's kind of lived the kind of life you've lived, right life, very successful guy. So, hi, Barry, welcome to White Collar Week.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Why don't we kind of start at the very beginning, because you have like a cool backstory, in terms of where you were raised and becoming a ball player and all of that. And that kind of informed a lot of the things that went on in your life. So why don't we start there?
Sure. My parents immigrated to Canada from Holland after the war. So I grew up in Canada. I'm Canadian. They, hardworking immigrant family, typical, shared a bed with my brother kind of thing, small house. My brother went to community college, worked his way through, cut grass, shoveled snow. My sister worked at McDonald's, paid her way through community college. I was sort of doing the same. They were obviously older than I was. And one summer I started playing ball. My body had grown to the point where I was, just shy of 6'10", and like Bambi on ice, I could suddenly do things, run, jump. One of the high school guys there when I was a freshman cut me, and he was sort of the guy that famously cut Barry Bekkedam. So, yeah. I had an opportunity one summer when a guy whose brother was an assistant coach at a high school in Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia guy. And he said, gosh, you run, you jump, you stink, but God, athletically, you could get some financial aid in the United States. They don't give financial aid in schools in Canada, per se. Yep. So I said, yeah, well, what a great opportunity. My sister talked my, deeply religious, immigrant parents and letting me take a shot. They found a family for me to live with outside of Philadelphia. I went to Archbishop Carroll High School. And that family became my mom and dad too. It was a crash course in basketball. Philadelphia Catholic League is quite challenging. But I learned very quickly. Played very well my junior year. Went to all those usual summer camps. My senior year. And my senior year, I was a McDonald's All-American, Pennsylvania Player of the Year, and literally changed my life. I went from, gosh, I want to get some financial aid for college to pretty much anywhere you want to go. I didn't feel like moving again, and it was still within driving distance of my family's home in Canada. So, and Villanova had just won the national championship.
Nova.
So I decided to stay at home and play at Villanova. My understanding that it was a 4-year degree kind of financial aid thing, and that's what I was focused on. So I was an accounting major there, arguably one of the best degrees you can get at Villanova. So that was something I wanted to do, and I played for Canada during summers and off seasons. Went overseas after that, and so played a lot of basketball till my knees pretty much gave out. And in the meantime, just literally loved business. I mean, business was something that I just always wanted to do.
Yeah. So where's the nexus between team player, team sports, learning about your character, growth, and then heading into business and knowing, adapting the skills as kind of a 6'10" guy in a world of mere mortals?
Well, it's all the great athletic skills that you get, right? Hard work, discipline, working as a team, but playing, especially in the Big East and traveling around with a major college program, you have to be on it. I mean, you're studying, you're truly a student athlete. And so, scheduling your time, because you're either in practice, you're either in a shoot around, you're training, you're trying to study in between and get good grades. So, and have a good time, have a college experience, which I certainly did. We had a lot of fun. And so, Rolly Massimino made sure of that, our coach. So, it's all of those things, but most importantly, time management. Rolly had a theory that if you had more than 2 hours off, you'd probably get in trouble. So he kept us busy all the time.
Probably right.
Yeah, probably right.
Yeah.
So, I know I would have partaken in having fun when I could, as any young guy would. So, yeah, no, it was definitely a learning experience and prepares you for business. Why so many great business people have athletic backgrounds. And so, but that hard work started with my parents. Started with them cleaning office buildings at night for extra money, and that immigrant sort of grittiness was something that was just second nature at that point.
And one of the things I picked up from when we talked last was that Will Smith has a series of videos out. Will Smith, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but a movie star, right? And one of the things he says is that people look at him as if he's a rapper or as a movie guy, but what they don't really look at him as a guy who is super focused and super successful and and can be successful in anything because he has that drive to be successful. And so we're so quick to categorize people, but it's not surprising that an athlete, for example, would become successful in business because it's the same muscle, it's the same drive. And so I found that fascinating in when I talked to you, and it kind of reminded me of that. So where do you go next after Villanova?
Well, I went overseas and played. So I lived in Germany for a little while. I lived in South America for a little while. Saved my money. I had a mentor that was in the real estate business. So he taught me how to buy my first rental property. So I really started in real estate, multifamily, storage, warehouses, B office space, and, everything from painting to, taking out the trash, whatever it took. To learn, going to my first closings to figure out how these things were bought, how to run the numbers, so to speak. We would drive around with a truck and look at commercial properties with a back of the envelope and an HP 12C, right? And try and see whether there was an opportunity there. And so with his mentorship, I ended up with a fair number of properties and an income stream. And so, as they say, I made my first $1 million in properties. And working with community banks, and nobody else would give you a loan back then. It was a community bank that you had to deal with. They were the most entrepreneurial. And so that's really where I got my start, was on the real estate side.
And so how does that grow, or for you, how did that grow from being a real estate entrepreneur? And because brick and mortar real estate is kind of easy. Well, I shouldn't say that because I was a real estate lawyer, but but it's kind of easy, at least to understand. It's not a complicated. It's not a complicated business. I mean, it might take a lot of moxie, but it's not a sophisticated business. And you wind up getting into some pretty sophisticated businesses.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I was never a developer. I was never that risky. Although I did develop a couple of self-storage facilities, but we really knew the math, right? We knew once we converted them to a self-storage facility, how we would do. Because we bought an existing self-storage facility, and it opened my eyes to self-storage.
Under rented, deferred maintenance, you're just figuring out the math, right?
Yeah. Doing multifamily with a big apartment building, wow, you got to really manage all these people as they're living there. So, went through that learning curve, learning how to finance them, learning how to value them. And so, that was bread and butter entrepreneurialism. You're right. But, it teaches you when you've never done any of this stuff. My father was certainly not a businessman. It was pretty much self-taught. I didn't go to work for another company. I've never worked for really anyone from that perspective. And so this was pretty much self-taught. I remember a lot of my friends in Villanova going to Wall Street, and I recall, being full of paint and doing other things and grinding that stuff out and putting on a suit to go to happy hour because I was working on properties all day. And so, but I kind of felt like I was missing something, on Wall Street. I was fascinated by it, but really didn't know, and I was never formally trained.
Yeah, but you had to know that this is entrepreneurship at its core. Like you're right. So what's the next big step for you?
The next big step was I met these guys who were in the registered investment advisory business, and they were within a group that was selling life insurance to high net worth individuals. They were, cold calling wealthy business owners to get them to do estate planning and all things like that. It ended up with a life insurance sale more than not. And so I, like anything else, I put on a suit, went down there and saw what these guys were doing and just started hanging out to watch what money management was all about and how they were looking at it. And it blew me away, I'll be honest with you, when I got a chance to sit with and be invited to meetings with some wealthy families as they were talking estate planning like a fly on the wall. They invited me, sure, come in this meeting, And I was blown away at what I thought was going to be this eye-opening sophistication. And what I noticed were an awful lot of these families really had organizational problems. They had money all over the place. They weren't really paying attention because the bulk of their wealth was in a privately held business and not necessarily in the liquid assets spread out all over the place. And so not only was it administratively somewhat disorganized, just to collect the information from the family post the patriarch passing, for example, was finding a wild goose chase of paperwork.
Yeah.
And so just providing consolidated reporting for these people seemed like an idea. And so at the time, there was a new software company in San Francisco called Advent, and they were doing downloaded reporting through broker dealers and so forth and so on for RIAs, and that was a new thing, but not really for the alternative assets. And back then, alternative assets were leftover limited partnerships from the 80s that they didn't know what to do with, if you recall.
Yeah, sure.
And so, I really learned that there was sort of, like I said, a lack of sophistication among a great number of very wealthy families that own businesses. And there presented itself an opportunity to work with them to not only provide asset management, which they seemed to just sort of, sure, you can do that. But at the same time, there was a need for, but do me a favor, organize all the other stuff we have. We've got several $1 million in our family's charitable foundation. We've got the company's pension plan has, a few $1 million there. And so there are, pockets of capital, dad's old roommate at Merrill Lynch, we gave him a few million, years ago, so there wasn't any real organization to it. And that really presented an opportunity to me. So I spent some time with the guys that were doing it there, watched what they did badly, and ultimately said, I can do this. Having never done it before, I formed a registered investment advisory, registered with the state of Pennsylvania. Had a handful of people there that I'd gotten to know. I had a partner for a little while. That didn't really work out. And so I I went on my own and founded my own RIA and private wealth business.
And did you have to get licensed? Did you have to go through any schooling, training for that kind of thing?
What I thought was interesting is that you at the time, if I recall, was you needed a Series 65, you needed a Series 7. But once you got the RIA, you didn't necessarily need to maintain those licenses. So while I was at the life insurance group, I studied with them and did all the things necessary to pass those exams. But once you became an RIA, you didn't need to necessarily keep those licenses on a shelf per se with a broker dealer, because my business plan was never to sell anything to anyone.
Right.
So the reality was we didn't require it because fee only objective advice was the goal of the firm.
So I think this is interesting for people who are starting out, trying to find a career path, are intimidated by going out there on their own. And so you kind of bootstrap your way right into doing from thing to thing to thing. And now you are rubbing elbows with people who can change your life in a significant way.
Well, I had some people that believed in the idea. Interestingly enough, the first office I had was built out in the front of a self-storage facility.
Yeah.
And we ended up managing hundreds of millions of dollars there before we moved to what will be considered Class A space. But the real sort of macroeconomic play that I made or that I presented to clients, which I had no idea would turn into a $1 trillion industry, was introduction of an asset class called private income. What I noticed was that the delivery system of double-digit income producing idea flow from Wall Street to wealthy families was almost non-existent. A typical portfolio back then was generally 50-50 stocks and bonds. The bonds were a ladder of some sort. And to the extent that there were private assets in a portfolio, it was private equity, not necessarily in kind of income producing asset. And of course, being a self-storage guy, I'm sitting there looking at the 10 cap that we're buying, right, with no debt, and looking at the returns saying that seemed like a deliverable for people. And as we've watched the yield depression that has occurred over the last 20 years or so, really since 1994, which is exactly when I started this, there became this pressing need on the part of all these families, especially when they sold their operating businesses and created liquidity, to replace income. Because the 50-50 stock and bond portfolio, when the bond portfolio started dropping in yield, and the stock portfolio became over-reliant with volatility, especially the dot-com crash, there was this nice ability to sort of insert in between a series of Walgreens land leases, apartment buildings, private preferred equity in businesses. So certainly not venture capital or anything of the sort, but what I would hope would be a more predictable asset class generating higher yields than could be purchased publicly, clearly with the illiquidity associated with that. But at the same time, there was just this overwhelming need. And so when I would present to a family versus a competition with other wealth firms who had no ability to deliver that and solve we sold our business, now we need income to live on, nobody else could come up with that answer, or there was generally not an answer to that. And so for many, many years, that was really the goal of the firm.
And were they asking questions like, or did they have independent people at that point who were still working with them, or were they asking questions about like what brick and mortar is behind this? I mean, these are there's actual buildings or investments behind that are securing these investments. I mean, was that part of the equation?
Oh, sure. I mean, everybody had their gatekeepers and their accounting people. We never touched client money. It was always housed at Fidelity or Schwab. I used to pair them off against each other to get cheaper costs. It didn't mean we didn't have traditional assets. So our long-only portfolio was highly diversified. Our fixed income portfolio, we had several $100 million of fixed income. So we definitely had other asset classes. We just put these private assets in the middle. And then as we grew, it's funny, the industry started to grow too. So there were funds that delivered that. So in the Philadelphia area, the Lupert Adler guys were very successful in creating their real estate income fund, their business income fund, which is now, I think, in the hundreds and billions of dollars. A small group down in Atlanta called Chatham Capital, which are the former GE guys. They are very successful and very good. So we started making allocations to funds like that. Mm-hmm. So the industry grew up around us, so we didn't have to necessarily invest directly into companies. But at the same time, there was this growth pattern with my business. We went from 10, 15 clients and 50, 100 million under management to 155 clients and a couple billion very quickly.
So how did you know, as a guy who was not classically trained or hadn't worked in a larger organization, how did you know how to put that organization together with the various departments that you would need and layers of management and checks and balances? How do you know how to do that? Or you're bringing in people who do know how to do it?
I didn't. I had to learn. You read a lot. You talk to a lot of people who are your mentors. You look at who you should hire. First of all, you outsource to a really good law firm. You outsource to a really good accounting firm. You try and partner with as many people as they did. In hindsight, that firm, we grew way too fast and outstripped the talent that I had, which is not uncommon. We were very much a disruptor because when we met with customers, we almost always got hired because nobody else could deliver. So we were correct on that front. But the reality is allocating capital, was difficult because we had a lot of capital coming in. And, be honest with you, there were professionals who saw our ability to raise capital and took advantage of us and took advantage of me in terms of promising and not delivering for our client base. And it got away from me. I'll be very honest with you. We grew so fast that even though I hired staff, I hired, ultimately CFAs and full-time general counsels, like that. We could have used more, and I would have done that differently. But conceptually, we were 100% right. Operationally, could have executed significantly better.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed, because compliance is just coming into the modern age at that point.
Right.
And of course, compliance is very reactive to what's going on in terms of governmental oversight and things like that. And a lot of people are getting burned along the way, or they're getting hurt. And that's where you learn from, or that's where the compliance learns from. So what's the next step in you becoming a banker?
Well, the first of all, on the compliance front, we always outsource to, the compliance firms for companies that would handle a lot of that. And I kept the business simple. We were always fee only. So we never touched client money. To the extent they invested in a private fund or a private investment, they wired the money directly into that investment. We never touched their money. They signed individual offering memorandum, right? They received individual reporting to them, not to us, although we were copied to create the consolidated reporting that they really liked. So from that perspective, we kept it really simple. Now, certainly when we got into the billions of dollars, the regulators didn't see RIAs with that size, that fast, and these types of asset classes. So that meant the audit was a week of them sitting in our conference room, which that's why I had a general counsel, and that's why I hired a firm to handle that. And we had never in the history of the company did we have a compliance issue. I'll never forget the one where the guy said, "Do you have a complaint file?" And I said, "Well, we don't have any complaints." He took a file out, wrote complaint on it, and he said, "You've now complied with rule number," whatever rule number that was. I thought that was kind of interesting.
So you're getting very big, very fast, and you got to figure out what your personal growth mode is, how what you want to do with the rest of your life. So what's the next move you make?
Well, business-wise, this is getting close to the Great Recession, right? And you had asked me about banking, which is really so I really was never a banker ever. What happened was in 2003, I was shooting baskets in my driveway in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. And my neighbor walked across the street. I got to know him, and he was the former CFO of a very successful community bank in Philadelphia, one of the most successful. That bank was sold. He was working for another bank, and we sort of talked banking because I was sort of fascinated with how community banks work and banks in general. I saw a lot of families investing early in community banks and had done very, very well. And so I had an interest there. My understanding is he was approached by regulators to take over a bank that was not performing. It's a very, very small bank, about 100 million in assets, I think. This was in 2003. And because they were failing, administratively or whatnot. And would he take it over? Would he raise the capital to take it over? He said he would, because he was familiar with where their problems were and said it was a great opportunity. So we looked at the bank. We looked at the opportunity to be in a small community bank. So we put together some capital to invest in the bank. He had asked, would I want to be involved? And from a learning experience, I said, absolutely. I would love to get involved. And he said, well, there's a chairmanship open. Would you like to be the chairman of the bank? I said, oh, yeah, sure. Why not? So again, it's a very small bank. So I became chairman in an uncompensated role to remain objective to the very small investment that we had in the bank in terms of the investors in the bank at that time. And so, 2003, 4, 5, I'm part of this community bank having the early morning meetings. The rest of the board meetings didn't like it because I called the meetings at 7 a.m. in Philadelphia because I'm an early morning guy. And, so we could be done by lunch.
Yeah.
And so it was fascinating. I learned a lot about how banks are regulated, how they're capitalized, about the accounting that I did not know, about the margins, interest rate margins, and so forth. So it was a really good learning experience for me. By 2006, I just didn't have any time. I was working so much and traveling so much. It was impossible for me to be on that board anymore. So I resigned in about 2006 from both the holding company as well as the bank.
Yeah. So where's the first sign of trouble? Where does that start to come into this?
Wow. So in 2009, we had any number of investments that required workworkouts, not unusual in a Great Recession scenario. But we felt fairly confident in most of the assets, and customers were still with us, and we were producing our reporting. And there were some businesses that required workouts, which is not unusual during that period of time. But we felt good that we would get through this, just like we got through the dot-com recession. And interestingly enough, before the dot-com recession, you were fired for not being in dot-com stuff, and then afterwards, you remember those days. So
I got burned so heavily in the dot-com burst. I can't even tell you. It affected my whole life. So in 2009, we had made a very small loan relative to the size of the firm. It was about $32 million with a very ultra high net worth individual in South Florida. I remember him fighting me aggressively on the personal guarantee that we provided, that we got for our clients. Yeah. And we had an idea who was going to take us out at the end of the year. But in the meantime, our clients would get a nice 15% coupon. We knew again that we would probably get out at the end of the year, sort of bridge loan capital kind of thing. Yeah. And so we provided that capital, and I got to know this gentleman in South Florida. He was a friend of my wife's, and we, so we had that among all kinds of investments all over the country. Yeah. Right. This was again a relatively small investment, but as the year progressed. Again, you're running around, you're trying to manage through this horrible recession impacting just about it. There is an investment that isn't impacted because your good investments are being drawn down to fund the bad ones for people who need liquidity. Yeah. So it was a very difficult time, as you know. October 31st, 2009 is when the Rothstein Ponzi scheme was announced to the world. Right. That this was a Ponzi. And of course, I ended up meeting in Fort Lauderdale with a whole group of people. Most of us had no idea that this guy had taken money from the other group of people. And we met in a big conference room and realized that we were all victims of the Ponzi scheme. My clients being about $32 million, give or take. So your clients are in the Ponzi scheme, but does your group have its own money in this scheme, or are you advisory?
We don't invest ever with our customers or clients. So our clients provided a loan to this individual. He put that capital into the Ponzi scheme.
Right.
So I think he had about $100 million of his own money in the Ponzi scheme, as well as his family and friends. So he was probably among the larger victims. Our clients were approximately $32 million. And again, loaned to him with a personal guarantee. He's a guy with a net worth of, easily 9 figures. So the personal guarantee was not without merit. And so but ultimately, the Ponzi, which we were a step removed from, lost all the capital. And so it was eye-opening to all of us. How could this possibly be? And we all know now the history of Rothstein's Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. So how do you get dragged into this now? How does this become a problem for you?
Well, clearly, when you're pulled into a Ponzi scheme and your firm gets named and you get named, we're come across we came across the people as this big feeder to the Ponzi. And interestingly enough, we had nothing to do with the Ponzi. We gave a guy a loan, right? So for us, there's no way to hide from that. I learned very fast that it was just a meltdown of public relations, and that litigation often takes years to figure out. And in the meantime, we're also fighting a great recession and trying to manage other investments that need our attention and time. And so the distraction of being involved in a Ponzi with unknown litigation was something way beyond me. I had no idea what was to come. I had no idea how it would impact us, but our marketing people couldn't market. Our clients didn't want to be associated with it, not because of a loss of money, but a lot of it had to do with just embarrassment of being sucked into it.
Yeah.
How could this possibly happen to us? And so not many people really wanted to listen, to the extent that you had done due diligence and looked at this thing and felt very confident that we would get all the money back, which ultimately happened. The vast majority of capital was recovered. But the reality is that nobody really wanted to hear that then. And I found myself almost out of business within months. It was impossible to manage the business defending yourself in the private wealth business when you've been pulled into a Ponzi.
So what comes next? Because the crosshairs of the government fall on you. So how do we get from where you were in this advisory role and lending money and got caught up in someone else's Ponzi scheme to you actually becoming a target?
Well, I didn't know anything about, which most of us don't. I don't know anything about being targets of anything in terms of a criminal investigation.
Yeah.
At the time, we were dealing with hiring attorneys for our clients to represent them in the Ponzi recovery.
Yeah.
That was our focus. And when I basically sold off or did a cooperation agreement with another firm to save the jobs for my employees, longtime employees, again, the whole emphasis was how do we recover this capital that's in not just the Ponzi, but in other transactions that required workouts during the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was advised not to deal with our clients anymore and not to work on any of the workouts. So I just wanted to roll up my sleeves during the Great Recession and work through it all. And I was advised not to do that I really needed to pay attention to, what litigation was coming. Interestingly enough, I don't believe we were ever contacted by the South Florida regulators, whether it be criminal or otherwise. They learned very quickly that our firm had nothing to do with the Ponzi. We never made any money from it because we're a fee-only advisor. So if our clients are in a money market or a mutual fund, we get paid the same amount.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, there was no feeder fee. So technically, I consider a feeder meaning you got paid to put it there. We didn't get any out. So from that perspective, there was never any regulatory problem there, and we never really had regulators calling us. What we did have was civil litigation by all the investors in the Ponzi showing up at our doorstep just circling around everybody that was involved, suing everybody without any real investigation of whether you were involved or not. So that litigation started brewing pretty quickly around our whole business, myself, anybody associated with the Ponzi.
So you must have been freaking out. I mean, this must have been and affecting your family, affecting your health, affecting everything.
Yeah, I mean, reputationally, it's hard. I worked really hard to build the investment firm from the early 90s. And so to have lost a company that I was so proud of and worked so hard to build was devastating, financially and otherwise. I at the time, my wife, we didn't know what we were going to do next. It was very hard to go back to work because there was sort of this Ponzi thing, and until it got resolved, it was very difficult to accept any kind of work of any kind, and to work on any major projects. You just didn't know what was going to happen. So for us, it was a wait and see. It was let's hire our lawyers and tackle each of the litigations as they came up, all civil litigations. And so what took place there was in 2013, I was dismissed entirely from the civil litigation associated with the Ponzi, which was great news because we never made any money from it and certainly weren't involved in it. So although that took 3 years of stress, and little did I know that was the tip of the iceberg in terms of what was going to happen to me.
Yeah. Well, did any of your lawyers tell you back then that it could be the tip of an iceberg? That things once these balls start rolling, it's unpredictable about how it can wind up affecting you?
No, most of the attorneys there were all civil because that's all we were dealing with. Were civil, we want money, kind of litigations, right? Interestingly enough, we started getting noise that the FBI in Philadelphia was asking questions of some disgruntled investment advisory customers that I had, and we certainly said, okay, we'll answer subpoenas or whatever came down the path. We couldn't quite figure out what that was about because it really wasn't about South Florida. It wasn't really about the Ponzi. It didn't feel like anyway. But we didn't think we had anything to worry about. So we just, we responded to subpoenas as they came. But it seemed like the Philadelphia criminal folks, the prosecutors, had an interest in something or another and began in 2010, 11, 12, 13. And every few months I'd get a call from a lawyer saying, well, they're looking at this now. Do you have any idea what this is? Or do you know what this is? And so, but there was never really a pattern to it. It was look at everything in my old firm, look at everything around the Ponzi, look at everything around pretty much everything that I'd ever been involved in. So to say, gosh, I was concerned about something, you couldn't really tell what they were looking at.
But you get a knock on the door one day.
I never did. I never was contacted, I don't think, individually. I was never, I don't recall. Again, it was always your lawyer buffer, right? But I remember my ex-wife being subpoenaed at one point. They showed up with 3 cars in the driveway, so to speak, in suburban Philadelphia. I handed her a note. And I remember her telling me, I asked them, I said, you needed 3 cars to show up and deliver me this thing? And so, interestingly enough, they were asking about a payment that they referred to it as an investment that she made in Nova Bank. Or she went down to meet with the prosecutor and had a meeting with him and discussed that investment. Turns out it wasn't an investment; it was a deposit by me into her bank account at Nova Bank, where we happened to bank. And they asked her about it, and she handed them our divorce agreement, whereby I made that payment every year. And so that was about the end of the interview, and she left. So it was that kind of thing. There was really no pattern, didn't know really what the crime was there. But I will tell you, I never really thought anything about my old relationship with Nova Bank as being anything to do with this. It never crossed my mind that there was any exposure there at all. For us, it seemed to be because what we found is they were contacting all of the general partners and all of the private investments that we made, which might have been 80 or so at the firm, to find out if I had been paid under the table, to find out if I had done some different things like that. And of course, they didn't do that. So, our audit in 2008 by the SEC didn't show anything negative at all. And so the business became less and less of interest. We couldn't figure out what they were interested in.
So when do you find out exactly what they're interested in?
Well, I remember being in my car outside of my office in Florida, and I get a call from the lawyer, and some variation of this. He said, "Barry, they're going to indict you." And I remember saying, "For what?" And he said, "TARP fraud." Yeah. And I said, "What the hell is TARP fraud?" And he said, "Well, you're chairman of a community bank, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but gosh, I don't remember what year, but I resigned back in 05, 06. He said, "Oh." He said, "Well, that bank, they took TARP, right?" I said, "Well, honestly, I don't think they did." He goes, "You're kidding." I said, "Hold on a minute." And I remember I called the former CEO, my former neighbor, and I said, "Gosh, we're being indicted." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Anybody else?" And he said, "No, it's just you and me." I said,
"Oh, so he knew. So he knew already."
I think so. Again, I don't recall. This is years ago.
Yeah.
And so he said, I said, "What's TARP fraud?" He goes, "I don't really know." I said, I got to ask you a question. Did you guys take TARP? He goes, "We never took any TARP. We applied for it, but we never actually received it because they shut down the program." I said, "So if you didn't take TARP, how can there be a TARP fraud?" He goes, "I don't know." And that's really where it started. So I'll never forget. To this day, I still have the attorneys explaining the indictment to me because I still never understood the crime. Years you're dealing with this thing, I never understood what the crime was, and neither did they. Nobody really did.
So you get indicted, and now you have to respond. You have to go through the exercise of actually hiring a criminal lawyer and being involved in this. What is that about for you?
We thought that our life could go on, my wife and I, after the settlement and the dismissal from the civil litigation involving the Bonzi Scheme. The Bonzi Scheme was horribly embarrassing to me.
Sure.
Most people did not know the facts. If you talk to anybody, they think I ran a Ponzi. I had nothing to do with a Ponzi. And that was evident. And so this just seemed, as we were getting our life back together, out of nowhere. It just seemed so insane that this was just ramping up. But I remember the group of lawyers that we had talking about the fact that the indictment didn't make any sense. But the unusual step, certainly a lot of us make the mistake of saying, well, why can't we just go down there and explain it to them? That they got this wrong. And of course, that's when they're no, you're not going down there to talk to them. But in this case, surprisingly enough, there was a show of hands of the lawyers saying, yeah, we think we're going to go contact them and see if we can't work this out before the indictment becomes public. And so I ended up going down to visit with them for what seemed like an eternity. But hours and hours of sitting in a conference room.
And this is a formal proffer, queen for a day or whatever. This is.
Yeah. So I have 4 lawyers. They've got a whole group of people, including the agents involved in the case. And it was I left figuring, gosh, they asked me everything under the sun. I still at this point have no idea what the crime is because it's not evident based on the questions or the line of questions what the crime is. And so I felt pretty confident that, gosh, we answered their questions, that there didn't seem to be anything unknown out there, and that it might go away. But the last day, January 18th, I think, of 2015, they decided to unseal it and proceed with this litigation criminal case against Brian and I.
When you say last day, just describe for anyone who doesn't know what that means. Listening into this, what does last day mean?
Well, they told us that the day that they were making their decision to go public with this would be, I may be wrong, but the January 18th of 2015. And they waited right up until January 15th of 2018, didn't tell us anything, and they had just unsealed it. And so woke up one morning and I was a public, indicted criminal felon. So, soon to be anyway.
And it's in the news. There's a press release, all of that stuff.
Yep. And as you know, my opinion is you're guilty until proven innocent in this country when that comes out, because at that point, the wheels of the media, pretty much everything goes against you at that point. The odds you survive it are very small.
So and no doubt the nexus between although at that point dismissed, but the nexus with the Rothstein Ponzi becomes is part of the story and everything else.
Yeah, so it just compounds to your public reputation. That, gosh, what the heck is this? It's interesting to this day that people conflate the Ponzi with the criminal charge.
Still.
And they literally, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I ask people all the time, gee, I heard you went to prison. What these are people that supposedly know me, and they say, well, what did you do? Nobody can actually articulate my crime. Well, I haven't heard anyone get it right yet.
Well, recent articles about you relating to some cleanup stuff are still kind of conflating all that stuff. It's still there.
It's kind of all over the place. There's no real rhyme or reason to any of it. But at this point, there was at the 11th hour when the criminal prosecution's indictment came out. Mm-hmm. The SEC filed a civil case associated with the Ponzi, which I've subsequently settled. Mm-hmm. But that was put on a shelf until this long, many year drag out criminal case had to be defended.
So, how long is the criminal case, and when does it become clear that you're going to get a sentence that might involve some prison time? Well,
that doesn't happen until 2017, 18, right? Mm-hmm. So as you very well know, very few people go to trial with the federal government. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, you're either rich and stupid or you're innocent, 100% innocent. Really long odds to win at a trial. And so from my perspective, there was never a question we were going to fight. Mm-hmm. And my co-defendant, the same thing. Mm-hmm. In our situation, there was never a crime, mm-hmm. let alone my involvement in it. Mm-hmm. So we were going to fight. And as you know, that takes a long time. Mm-hmm. Out of you, takes a lot out of your family, but it's your life. And so to this day, I'm glad that we did that because we actually did win some parts of the case.
Yes.
Very important parts of the case. Mm-hmm. I never knew how important until I went to prison and learned how important. I probably would not be where I am today, literally, if I had lost those other charges.
Well, why do you explain that? Because I think that there's so many people who do not know that they can fight for their rights. They don't know that there are negotiable issues, that it's not just this big massive thing coming at them that overwhelms them, that actually good thinking, good business thinking, good lawyering can actually make a difference.
Sure. So like most federal cases, again, as you've seen, there's a lot of stacking going on. So there's a lot of charges here that had to be explained to me because, again, it's a very confusing situation.
Sure.
So I was personally charged with 2 counts of wire fraud. Mm-hmm. Those wire fraud charges were for referring to extremely wealthy people to Nova Bank when Nova Bank was raising capital during the Great Recession to grow the bank. First off, there were 2 kinds of TARP at that time. There was the TARP for the bad banks, and there was a TARP for the good banks to help them buy the bad banks. Nova Bank had applied for the good TARP because they were a healthy bank, and they were actually purchased a bank in 2008 without any government assistance. So as you very well know, the government's not letting you buy a bank if you yourself are not healthy.
Yeah.
So from Nova Bank's perspective, they were growing. They were raising $30-40 million to acquire another bank they had identified. Mm-hmm. They were acquiring a financial services firm that they had under agreement. Mm-hmm. So like all these banks, they reached out to everybody, hey, who can help us raise some more money because we want to take advantage of the Great Recession and grow. Mm-hmm. They certainly reached out to me. I identified 2 individuals that I thought immediately could help. Mm-hmm. One individual was building a home right next to their headquarters in Pennsylvania and seemed like a logical person, referred him. Mm-hmm. And he wired and participated in the investment. So did the other gentleman, who happened to already be an investor and already a borrower and already a depositor at the bank. So they already knew of him.
Well, these are super qualified individuals, and they know.
One testified he was worth $300 million. The other guy testified he was worth $125 million.
And they know. I'm sorry for stepping.
Yeah, no, please.
But so they know that you don't buy till there's blood running in the streets. The J.P. Morgan line, right? So that's what's happening in the recession, and they have both Nova Bank and these people have. They want to buy things on the cheap. They want to buy things. Right?
Sure. The bank was looking to grow. This was not a bank that had a business plan that was, gosh, we're going under. Mm-hmm. This was a bank that saw it as an opportunity to acquire other banks. That's why they embarked on buying the bank in 2008. And it seemed like a great opportunity for this bank that had already grown quite considerably since 2003. And so this bank did not have a whole bunch of residential mortgages that were going bad. It was a typical community bank, owner-occupied, commercial stuff, things like that. So the wire fraud was effectively me defrauding these two gentlemen. Well, they got up on the stand at trial and said, yeah, we made the investments. Yeah, we signed the paperwork. Yeah, Barry didn't get paid anything or try to get paid anything. So there's no economic in it for me. I didn't get a referral fee, didn't even try. It was just sort of, hey, let's help the bank out and make these referrals. Mm-hmm. So during the trial, the judge threw out one of the charges for lack of evidence, and I was found not guilty of the other wire fraud charge as part of the scheme to get TARP for Nova Bank that it didn't get. Mm-hmm. The second part of the scheme involved these two gentlemen had lines of credit, and so they charged Brian and I with bank fraud, implying that the loans to these two guys were fraudulent. Mm-hmm. Well, again, both guys get up there. They said, yep, we applied for loans. We made the payments. We knew we took out a credit line. The loan committee got up there, said, yep, we gave these guys a loan. We would give these guys a loan every day of the week, twice on Sunday. And so, there was painfully obvious that these guys qualified for lines of credit that they used and received, and had nothing to do with me. Everybody said they never even spoke to me. Nor did this CEO have any testimony that said that, gosh, he told us we had to give these guys lines of credit. So again, we were found not guilty of bank fraud.
But that was the thinking, that the money was circular. They were investing money and taking loans back. And
yeah, the theory would be correct. I think if, for example, I grabbed my secretary who, may not have made a high net worth or had an income and said, hey, don't worry about it. You go borrow some money from this bank. We'll get you qualified. We want you to borrow the money, and then we want you to take that money and invest it back into the stock of the bank.
Right.
That didn't happen. These were independent, high net worth, ultra high net worth individuals who borrowed money from a credit line that they qualified for, that I didn't get paid for, and they used some or all of that capital to invest in stock in a private bank.
Right.
CFO recorded that stock as an increase to the bank's capital.
Right.
Nobody said it wasn't. I don't do accounting for the bank because at that time I'm not on the board. Mm-hmm. I'm not a shareholder. I'm not an officer. I'm a nothing to the bank from that perspective. I have former clients that are investors in the bank, but I'm not receiving any compensation from the bank at all.
So, what are you eventually convicted of?
I didn't know this was possible. Mm-hmm. But we were found guilty of the conspiracy of this scheme to defraud the government of TARP that the bank never got. Again, the bank never received any TARP funds because they actually did shut this program down. Mm-hmm. So the conspiracy involves Brian and I, the CEO of the bank, where we have an agreement. Of course, there's no email or testimony that I'm calling up this guy during the Great Recession and saying, hey, man, I want to make sure you conceal these legal transactions from the government that's not asking you about them. But there's apparently agreement between he and I that he would conceal transactions that are 100% legal from the regulators on the bank's application to get TARP that it ultimately doesn't get.
Have you seen the movie The Banker on Netflix or Amazon? Have you seen this movie? Oh, you have to see this movie because it's so close to this story. It's scary.
It's I still have nightmares about sort of this whole theory that they had. Look, they had a theory. It just didn't happen to be right.
Yeah.
In order to have a scheme, you would think that my involvement in the referral was illegal or that the bank loan was illegal. I mean, these are important components of the scheme.
Yeah.
Both were found not guilty of, right? Mm-hmm. So how good can the scheme be when the bank fraud and the wire fraud you're not guilty of? And clearly are not illegal activities. And you have the CFO. The other thing I could think that would be possible is if the CFO of the bank, who I'd never met at that time, I'd never met him before I saw him at trial, decided that he would become an unindicted co-conspirator, for example, and say, yeah, you know, these guys told me to do bad accounting and record these transactions as an increased capital. And I told them that it wasn't from an accounting perspective. But that didn't happen. He testified he did the accounting. To this day, he believes he did it properly, never met me, and the CEO never told him how to do it. The chairman of the bank at the time borrowed money from his own credit line in years previous to buy stock. It's not illegal. It's not against an accounting rule. And the judge ruled that there was no evidence at trial that it was. But somehow we're still guilty of a conspiracy.
So what's the fraud loss amount? What's the sentencing level that you're, excuse me?
0. There was no loss.
And so how did they sentence you?
And the judge ruled there was no intent to lose, interestingly enough, which became very important down the road.
Yeah.
So I had, at the time they gave me, I want to say 12 points because they misidentified me as the chairman of the bank at the time, which I was not. We corrected that. They also had another error in the PSR.
Yeah.
Which brought it down to, I want to say it was 8 points, which is 0 to 6 months. And that's where you are, 0 to 6 months. As you know, in the federal system, if you go to trial and get 0 to 6 months, you can't figure out what that crime was because that's really hard to do. Because
I've never heard of it before, actually. For anyone who's gone to trial.
Right, exactly, especially. And so we were fairly confident at that point that, you know, there would be no jail time. There's no victim. There's no greed factor in this case because I never made any money, nor did I attempt to make any money. So you got to figure, you know, wow, why would you send this guy to prison, right? I mean, there's no, they might have called it a conspiracy, but there's no greed attempt here, right? So at the sentencing, we were pleased when he took away the points to bring me down to the level that was 0 to 6, but then all of a sudden he added 2 points for understating the seriousness of the crime, which brought me right back to 6 to 12 months, proceeded to give me 11 months, which means I now have to serve the full 11 months.
Yes.
And he fined me $100,000. The CEO was sentenced prior to me. He got 14 months, which means he probably was going to serve 11.
Yeah.
And he was fined $50,000. As the guy who was part of the scheme, clearly closer to it than I was, because he was the actual CEO of the bank that did the concealing, he did nothing wrong. To this day, he's a kind and honest man. He didn't do anything wrong. But the point is that I'm clearly the bit player in this. But needless to say, I got a $100,000 fine. I recall some variation of why did I get $50,000 more? And it had to do with I could afford it. Which I thought was interesting.
I think that's how they assess fines, actually.
Yeah. So I ended up with a higher fine, even though I didn't make any money from this thing. My wife says I'm the worst criminal on the planet because in all of this, there's no monetary benefit to any of this. I didn't try to get paid in the Bonzi, and I didn't try to get paid in the bank situation. So I ended up with 11 months. And so we file for bail pending.
Yes.
Which, again, as you know, is an uphill battle. It's very rarely granted. We won. The Third Circuit granted bail pending, which implies that your appeal has merit, despite them having to look at the government's information or the case, in favor of the government. So that's a big step.
So did you have to go to prison before your appeal was decided?
No, because we won that.
Yeah, but
I had a turn-in date, but at that point I was free on bail.
Right, and so
I've never been arrested or cuffed or anything in my life.
So where was your appeal pending, and when did you find out that you lost the appeal?
The Third Circuit. The sentencing was in the first quarter of 2017. The appeal loss came in the summer of 2018. So the drip, drip, drip of time, again, is extraordinarily painful because you're just waiting for these decisions, for things to get filed, to redraft after draft of your appeal. And meanwhile, you can't work. There's nobody's going to work with you.
So your life has basically been hell for a decade.
Yes. Yeah.
So you've lost the appeal, and how much time do they give you to report? And when are you designated, and how much time do they give you to report?
Well, Jeff, that was a week unto itself. So I want to say it was on a Tuesday. I was working on a project in my office with a meeting, extremely important meeting at 10 a.m. I get a call at 9:45 from my attorney that I had lost the appeal, and that the Third Circuit had denied my appeal without any analysis. They provided no analysis. There was no way they could have denied my appeal with analysis because it was overwhelming. There wasn't even a process.
So was it a one-sentence order? Was it?
It was, interestingly enough, the sentence that sticks in my mind was some variation of the jury could not possibly have been wrong because it was painfully obvious that we knew that the capital could not be treated as bank capital, and therefore, this whole crime was a crime. And it's actually the opposite. There's only evidence in trial that the bank capital could actually be treated as capital. And there's zero evidence that I'm involved in any of it. I have no idea. Why would I be? I'm not involved with the bank's accounting. And the board of directors, as a side note, approved all of this, and was aware of all of it and testified to it. So the week that the appeal comes down, first of all, I'm in this meeting. I have to actually go through with the 10 o'clock meeting. My hands are shaking. I'm
scared. Of course.
I have no idea. I call my wife. I immediately go home. We don't even know what it all means at this point. We've been just fighting for so many years.
Yeah.
As stance would have it, my wife and I don't separate a lot because we both have anxiety when we're not together. And so she had to take a trip to North Carolina that Friday to be with one of our children. And so I was going to be alone on that Friday afternoon for a weekend. And talk about the worst weekend to be alone. Also that Friday, I was getting a regular checkup. I'm a tall guy, and I should get my heart checked regularly. So I had a heart scan done. Well, at 5:30 or so, it's pouring rain. I'm into a bottle of wine, and I'm sitting in my house lamenting my lot in life. And this call that I don't know is ringing off the hook. I finally pick it up, and it's my doctor. And he says, I got the good news and the bad news. The good news is your heart's perfectly fine. The bad news is we picked up a fairly large 9-centimeter tumor on your kidney. It's more likely than not to have to be operated on. I said, really? What more can happen? So I don't tell my wife. I wait till Monday morning. It's back because I have to go to the urologist. Find out that, yes, I have to have surgery. I have to have this thing removed. We then contact the courts to say, look, this is what's happening. He has to have this growth removed. Surgery is in October. There's a recovery time. As you know, all the paperwork you have to submit in order to get a turn-in date. My surgery was October 15th. The judge called a hearing in December, or I want to say December 10th or something, to decide on the turn-in date. So not only do you're having this surgery, went successfully. I thank all the University of Miami robotics team for doing an amazing job. And it turned out to not be cancerous, which is great news. I recover from that, lose a lot of weight under a lot of stress. And then waiting for this hearing to determine when I'm supposed to turn myself in. It's a week later or 5 weeks later.
Well, is the government pushing for you to have a surrender date at that point?
They don't really seem to be all that interested in it, to be honest with you. The prosecutor that pushed my entire case over the transom, within a short period of time, right after he filed my indictment, he quit his job and took a job at the SEC. and within a equally brief period of time, took a job in private practice.
I'm not surprised.
So private practice right now, showing my case as to why you should hire him as a great defense lawyer, which is quite comical to me.
Well, it's an interesting sidebar. There's not that many defense lawyers out there who actually have prosecutorial trial experience because there's not that many trials.
Correct.
So I can understand why he's using a trial as his calling card, because to find a trial lawyer who's actually been through trials is rare these days.
That's absolutely correct. And so, so we find out in December that my turn-in date, the judge has a sense of humor, was February 4th of 2019, which is my birthday.
Oh my God. So did he know that, or was it just coincidence?
It's just coincidence. He just ran. So my wife and I fly from here to Pittsburgh on February 5th. February 3rd. We watch the Super Bowl at the hotel in Pittsburgh, and my wife drives me to Moshannon Prison on February 4th, my birthday. Best birthday of my life.
Wow. And so how much time do you wind up serving there?
I serve 11 months. Moshannon is a low to medium because it's an immigration prison. Because I'm Canadian, I have to go to an immigration prison.
Right.
As we're approaching the end of my stay, I was never deportable, ever deportable, because the case has two primary ingredients. One, my sentence was less than 12 months. And two, there was no restitution or loss of greater than $10,000. So I was never deportable. I have a green card for 20 plus years. So that's at least part of the
unplanned outcome, the success of some of these issues in the middle of the trial that you probably think that you're preparing to be deported potentially, but as it turns out, you're not deportable.
Yeah, if I was found guilty of the bank and wire fraud charges, as you know, my sentence would be 2, 3, 4, 5 years at least.
Right.
What would limit it is the fact there was never a victim and there was never any money involved.
And were people prepping you for how you would be potentially detained post sentencing and then brought to ICE and then deported out of the country?
One of the biggest challenges was finding a good immigration lawyer. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
We interviewed 4. We got 4 different answers, and none of them were very good.
Yeah.
We lucked onto the best lawyer of our entire process at the tail end, thank God. But the reality is that I never in my wildest dreams thought that I would not walk out of that place into my wife's arms and we would go home together on January 2nd, 2020.
You can shout out the lawyer, by the way, if you think he did a great job. You can shout him out.
No, Ted Murphy was the best.
Yeah,
and so
where's he located?
He's in D.C. and Westchester, Pennsylvania. And there was a separate lawyer that he co-partnered with, which is a separate story. But his name is Craig Shagan. Between the two of them, they partnered together and had never worked together before. One's a Georgetown guy and one's a Villanova guy, which is sort of interesting. But they worked together, saving my life, effectively in terms of my ability to stay in the United States. I mean, my wife and I have 6 kids combined, and 2 dogs, a cat, and my life is in the States. So that was very important, obviously. But I did not anticipate being hauled away in chains like a serial killer. The day of my release, to be put into ICE custody for what turned out to be an additional 4 weeks in various locations, traveling all over the country, multiple bunks and cells with no end in sight. If the government decided to appeal, it would be a 6-month process. The lawyers assured me that we would win, but I had heard that before. But the reality was I was unnecessarily held by ICE for 4 weeks in really bad places.
Were you given
no reason whatsoever?
Were you given an A series number at that point? You're now an immigration detainee, right? So
yeah. So the first hearing was going to be February 5th this time, the day after my birthday, a year after I went to prison in the first place. And my wife got a call on a Friday right before that, that the judge in the case had thrown the case out before the hearing. Scathing report to the government that I never should have been held in the first place. Because one of the things they try to do is say there was an intent to lose greater than 10,000, even though there was no victim. But in this case, it's patently crazy, right? So a community bank's applying for TARP to then attempt to squander it. I mean, it makes no sense, right? And it certainly has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. But the fact that the trial judge said that there was no intent to lose any money in this case, he actually used those words in sentencing.
Yeah.
Back to help us in the immigration situation, because there was in fact no intent. They never should have held me in the first place. I should have been able to go home. And so I finally was released into the arms of my attorney's wife, because my wife had no idea that I would be getting out.
Yeah.
On the following Monday, and I met my sons in Philadelphia at the Marriott Hotel. One of my best friends picked me up at the lawyer's office. My wife flew in at 3 o'clock in the morning. We both drove to Washington, D.C., spent a couple nights in a hotel. I got a haircut and went home to Florida shortly thereafter. So
it's amazing. And so here's a little practice point. Read the transcript carefully of the court proceeding, because there could be gold nuggets in there.
There could be gold nuggets that in the immigration situation came back to help me out beyond. It was huge. To do that. You mentioned before sort of the the prosecutor and sort of that whole situation. Everyone always asks you, are you there?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Are you there? Okay.
Yeah.
My screen went down. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So always everyone asks me sort of, why do you think they pursued this?
Mm-hmm.
I believe that because my Ponzi scheme that I got pulled into happened so closely after the Madoff situation.
Yes.
That the Philadelphia, I don't think is a hotbed of white collar crime. It's not Wall Street, it's not DC, and it's not one of these other cities that tend to have a lot of this stuff. I don't think. And so if you're a prosecutor and you want to get ahead and you find out that there's this money manager who's a former Villanova basketball player and he's become very successful and grew rapidly with billions under management, there's no way that can be for real. And so he has to be running a Ponzi. And I think that this guy believed that he was going to find out that my firm was a Ponzi. He was going to be the one to uncover it. And so that's where I think that the Ponzi in South Florida led a Philadelphia prosecutor to sort of research that, because that's kind of where a lot of the early stuff hovered around my firm. But once you start expending agent resources, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, and you finally bring an indictment that has nothing to do with my old company or anything in 2015 or 14, that has nothing to do with any monetary loss whatsoever, boy, you're stretching. And so the theory is that, in a justification of resources, and as you pointed out, a springboard attempt, that's why this whole thing ended up coming into fruition.
Well, you're always looked at in relationship to what world events are going on at that particular time. So, for example, in my case, although I did commit fraud, so but because it was misuse of SBA loan funds post 9/11, there was no way that I wasn't going to be looked at in light of the fact that it was I was sentenced not that long after 9/11, and I was, although the judge was gave me a downward departure, I wasn't not going to serve prison time.
Right.
But under a completely different circumstance, maybe not.
We were devastated at the sentencing because it's 0 to 6 points and nonviolent, obviously.
Yeah.
But no victim and no money lost, but no greed factor. This entire case did not involve any money I was going to got, or received in any way, shape, or form. So, which also begs the question, what was my motive to do this thing? So I'm running effectively a big private equity RIA for 20 some years, doing transactions with hundreds of millions of dollars. And I randomly wake up one day and decide to commit this victimless conspiracy. It literally makes no sense.
So you come out, you're released from immigration detention, and COVID is weeks later.
Right around the corner.
Weeks later. So how's your life been over the last year? And have you been able to recover? Have you been able to find any firm ground under you? I mean, it's been a crazy decade. Now you're come out into a crazy situation.
It's my wife has been through the 10 years with me.
Yeah.
And I don't have to explain the toll. A lot of your viewers know that. And so the fact that she's hung in through this for all 10 years is truly a testament to the woman that she is. And so, for both of us, this is the first time in 10 years, we've been able to make a plan, certainly a financial plan. We haven't been able to budget properly because it's almost impossible to budget for thousands of legal fees coming up at each and every stage. But budgeting really for anything is a really difficult thing to do. So I got to tell you, the biggest thing I've realized the last year is twofold. One, how I was not myself and not of right mind the 2 or 3 years prior to because of fear and just uncertainty and an inability to find out who I am every day waking up, and the stress.
Trauma everywhere. Trauma.
The unknown. You just don't know. And couple that with the kidney surgery at the time, it was just, it was truly an overwhelming thing for me. But now it's the opposite. I feel very liberated after 10 years of not being able to look at a business, start a business, have partners say, gosh, he's going to be there to actually execute, is really exciting.
And you can't talk about this. Look, this is your first interview, really, right?
Yeah. No, not so much that I haven't. I've been writing a lot. I started Stolen Freedom, which is, maybe it's a book, maybe it's just therapeutic. It'll ultimately be on my website, Stolen Freedom. But you have to get it out. You have to. For me, writing about it has been helpful in terms of articulating what happened and how I felt, and certainly for my kids, I think it'll be good to know over time all of those things. Look, Bekkedam is not Smith. When you Google it comes up, and my kids have that last name, so that's not an easy thing. And so they certainly should be armed with an effort on my part to restore that. But what few people really understand, which is a part of my intro to the book, is during the entire process, you really can't talk about it, right? Because you really can't fight the nonsense that's on the internet, right? I mean, this one woman wrote this article, I'll never forget. It said, and he was recruited by prestigious Catholic schools. Okay, so McDonald's All-American are only recruited by Catholic schools? Things like that just are just silly. But you can't compete or you can't go back and correct these people. You'll drive yourself crazy. Because they really don't care and they don't want to be right anyway. But it's hurtful. And especially during the legal proceedings, as you know, you can't say anything.
No.
The good news is that I did go to trial. And they can't stop me from talking about this case ultimately.
So what's your legal situation right now? Are you clear of everything? Are you?
Yeah. I'm on supervised release. I have another, year and change of that to go. There's no monetary issues, or there's no money that I owe or anything like that. And so, I'm, just putting in that long time. I think it's amazing. It's effectively the same position you were in for the years you were fighting. and now you're just doing that all over again.
Yeah.
The people within the department that oversee that, I have, there's an especially kind lady now who's human. She's fine. She understands. I think that's an important part of the process.
And she let you do this interview. So
yes. Yep. I asked her whether I could participate.
So Barry, in wrapping up, because taking us through the nuts and bolts, I think is very instructive for people who are facing it, or even for civilians out there who are just kind of like, have interest in it. What's the one or two big takeaways you have from all of this? Because no doubt you spent many, many nights thinking about how this all relates. And I'm sure some nights you felt like Job, and some nights you felt like, so, I mean, what's the big takeaway? I mean, do you think that this can happen to anybody? And so that it's just dumb luck of the draw if you're an ambitious guy, or what's the big takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, you clearly, when you're embarking in any business whatsoever, you need to be careful and really have professionals around you that you seek advice from, that on technical issues that you're not necessarily. I had no idea all the intricacies of bank capital. I had no clue. But you're right. I mean, when a prosecutor chooses to target you for whatever reason, it's almost impossible to stop them from tracking down whatever it is they want to track down. And if they want to make something up, they'll do it. And so, but the most important lessons are your family's in it with you, and never forget that. And so, especially my wife and her support, couldn't do it without her, couldn't rebuild without her. The question your lawyers, especially in white collar. Your lawyers in many cases are ex-prosecutors. They're lawyers. They're not business people. And don't underestimate the skill sets that made you very successful at business are skill sets that help you interpret things and or present things during your trial and other parts of this process.
Yeah.
And oftentimes those are skill sets that your lawyers don't have.
Yeah. Well, they're not business people.
No.
Right? Yeah.
You forget that you're pretty good at what you did back in the day before you started going through all of this, and you lose confidence, and sometimes you just blindly follow your attorneys. I think one of my best attorneys during the entire process ended up being local counsel Michael Engel in Philadelphia, who has never been a prosecutor. And I found it very valuable that he was never a prosecutor. He came at it from a different angle than all the other lawyers who were former prosecutors. I know Abby Lowell and his team, Chris Mann, who did my appeal. I'll never forget walking in their offices in Washington, and they took me by the hand when they took the case. And they said, we're really sorry. You did not commit a crime, and we're going to do our best. And they did a great job. But you do question your lawyers all along the way, and never lose faith. Never lose faith in the other side. And it gets dark. I was scared to death I was going to be deported and not be able to come back to the United States. And so, never lose faith in that process and in your family's ability to survive it with you. It's important.
Barry, thank you so much. As someone who has championed his own cause and actually gone to trial and weathered the storm and been vindicated in part and then had to serve in part. It's a fascinating story, and I'm really proud to call you a friend and a colleague in all of this and a fellow. So thank you, and God bless you, and I hope you'll join our support group one of these Monday nights, because
I promise I will. I promise.
Wonderful. All right, thank you, Barry.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on White Collar Week, sponsored by Progressive Prison Ministries. You can learn more about us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist, like feminist. And please remember to rate, review, and share this podcast so that families suffering in silence can find us if they need us. See you next time.